time to get started. And once we have maybe a minute or two after the time start, once we have enough people in, we will begin our webinar today. So thank you so much for attending. No matter where you are in the world, we're happy to have you here. So thank you again so much for coming. My name is Edmund Breitling. I will be your host for today's webinar. I wanted to ask you all, as you're joining, please feel free to use the chat. We're going to have it open just for this for 2 sessions throughout the webinar. The first is go ahead and put in who you're here with and where you are in the world. It'd be really fun to see where everybody is webinaring in from. We will be getting started in just about a minute or so, but we'd love to hear from you all. Okay, and we're going to get started in just a minute here. Again, if you're just joining, please put in the chat, where you're calling in from today, where in the world. We'd love to see that. Okay, and I'm going to ask the Inside Higher Ed folks to turn the chat off now. If you have questions throughout today's webinar, please feel free to put them into the Q&A section of your Zoom portal, and we'll be able to answer those as we move through the webinar. So welcome again, today's webinar, Innovations in Hybrid Learning, How to Engage Students and Promote Institutional Success, co-hosted with Inside Higher Ed and Class Technologies, and sponsored by Class Technology. So thank you again. I am excited for today's panel. We've got some really phenomenal folks on the call today to answer some of your questions and talk about some of the challenges that are in the industry and within higher ed today. So with that, let's talk about our agenda. So we're going to go through introductions. We're going to meet your hosts, your host class. We're going to talk about the higher education landscape today, do a little panel discussion, and then at the end, Q&A, although we will be answering questions throughout the call today. This is going to be recorded and will be shared 24 hours, just about a little more than 24 hours after today's initial webinar. Stay tuned for that. So with that, let's talk about our panelists. First, we have Audrey Witters, Managing Director of Online Education, Executive Education with Stanford, the Graduate School of Stanford Business. And we have Adrian Phelps-Coco, Executive Director of Teaching and Learning for Harvard Division of Continuing Education. And me, I'm Edmund Breitling with Higher Education Partnerships here at Class. So Audrey, take it away. Tell us a little about Stanford Business School.
Thanks so much, Edmund, and thank you also to Class and to Inside Higher Learning and to everyone who's joined us today. I'm really excited to be here. I'll give a quick overview of the Stanford Graduate School of Business and particularly my department, Executive Education. I've been with Executive Education here since 2002, but our programs actually have gone on far, far longer than that. We launched our first program in the 50s, and so we've been helping executives learn and grow for more than 65 years. Our mission at the Executive Education Department is to inspire global leaders to change their thinking and to drive positive impact throughout their organizations with our faculty's ideas and our faculty's frameworks. We offer over 100 programs each year, and those programs impact over 5,000 executives coming from nearly 100 different countries around the world and including more than 50% of the Fortune 500. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. And next we have Adrian coming to you live from the studio. Let's hear a little bit about the Harvard Division of Continuing Education.
Hello, everybody. I am Adrienne Phelps-Coco, and I am the Executive Director of Teaching and Learning here at the Harvard Division of Continuing Education. I'm very excited to be here today, so thank you all for having me here, and thank you all for participating in this discussion. I'm really excited about it. So just a little bit about Harvard DCE. We are kind of an umbrella of the Harvard Extension School, which primarily serves adult part-time learners, and the Harvard Summer School, which also serves those learners, but layers high school programs on top of that. The professional development programs, which are short-form, non-credit programs for mid-career professionals, and the Institute for Learning in Retirement. So the Extension School, which is our largest program, is an open enrollment program. Anyone can sign up to take classes. And we have an earned admissions policy for people who are trying to get a degree with us. We offer both bachelor's and master's degrees, as well as graduate certificates. And earned admissions means there are certain pre-admissions courses where students have to receive at least a B in those courses in order to be admitted to the degree program. So whatever happened in your life before you got to the point where you came to Harvard Extension, you have a clean slate when you come here. We first took classes online in 1997 when we had one course done entirely as lecture capture. And now last year we offered more than 1,500 online semester-long courses in a variety of different formats, as well as about 200 professional development programs online. So that's a little bit about us.
Well, thank you so much. So those are our panelists. We are going to move on and talk a little about class. So Class was founded by Michael Chasen, former founder of Blackboard, pretty much in response to COVID, to the pandemic. He saw his 3 children, trying to be wrangled by this 3rd grade teacher on Zoom, and said there's got to be a better way. And so he got together with his team and created Class. Class really solves these things that you see up on the screen there: the teaching and learning tools, student engagement tracking, attendance ID verification, proctored exams, seating charts, and classroom management tools. All the things that Zoom, wasn't necessarily hitting the nail on. We added those features to Zoom from Class. So the hybrid class support, super important to the discussion today. We offer multiple camera spots in here. You can see the instructor's always in the top left corner called the podium. We have a classroom camera. We have the ability to separate out students so that you have them on one screen and your material is on another screen. We also have the ability to do things like this, where you broke up the class tool into lots of variations. So this is something that we have exciting experience with, and getting some great feedback from some of our clients. Enhanced breakout rooms is another really great tool. The one feature that every instructor in the whole world, K-12, higher ed, and corporate training have been asking for: the ability to see all of your breakout rooms at once, live as they're happening. You can see which students are speaking and what they're all discussing, which feature is up. The proctored exam view, this allows you to see your students' cameras on the left and their shared screens on the right. If they have multiple screens, you'll see all of them. This is kind of a low-tech way of proctoring exam, but also can be used for individual work. You can see what everybody's working on and kind of go around the class as they're working on their individual work. Over here, we're going to talk about hybrid education today. Let's talk about the landscape, what we've got going on. So in the news, a lot of things are happening, right? You're hearing kind of less about the impact of COVID and more about, well, what have we learned from COVID, right? What are the learnings moving forward? So you've got some of the headlines here from the news, and it really prompts us for today's discussion. So we are going to open the chat again. We would love to hear from you all about what are some of the benefits of hybrid learning. So participants, please take the time. We'd love to hear from each of you about some of the benefits that you've experienced with hybrid learning, right? We all know that there's lots of different ways that you can learn, right? Whether it's physically in class, or remote, or asynchronous, or synchronous, or high flex. And there's a lot of there's a lot of ways and a lot of terms that are flying around. And we're going to kind of get level set on those in just a moment, kind of discuss what the different terms mean for all of us here. Okay, so I'm seeing lots of great things in the chat. Please keep it up. We'd love to see what you're thinking here. I love that. Initially for survival. Yeah, fully get it, right? Every instructor on the planet got a crash course in remote learning of one kind or another. Choose your own adventure. Variety, flexibility, accessibility, more engaging, increased student engagement, increased student access, reduces need for $7 gas. Yeah, right. So that is really great. Thanks, everyone. If you're finishing up, we'll leave that chat open for just a second. We're going to go on to the next tab here. And so panelists, I would love to hear, we've got a million different terms and thoughts and theories around teaching remotely and virtually. I'd love to hear what these terms mean to you all. So Adrian, take it away. And Audrey, I'd love to hear from you right after.
All right, so we actually had a discussion about this behind the scenes because these terms are really quite complicated. So for the purposes of today, I want to try to define some of these terms. We are defining virtual learning as something that is happening in the online space. That could be broken into asynchronous learning, where students are not there at the same time. They're working through at their own pace. Or synchronous learning, meaning students are all there in real time. Where we call this live online learning, which is different from in-person learning, which is happening in the classroom. And then hybrid is some combination of the two. And in a minute, Audrey and I think we'll both talk about how we do hybrid at our own institutions. And then we have another term here, which is high flex, so hybrid and flexible. And this is where really you do all of these at once. So you have students in the classroom, as well as live online students or synchronous students, as well as asynchronous students, all happening in the same class at the same time.
So I'm happy to follow that nomenclature, and the only one little thing that I would say we call different at Stanford would be, I will call it a blended program if it's including both synchronous, like significant amounts of both synchronous and asynchronous learning. We would still call that a blended experience. I think it's the only thing. Everything else I think is close enough. And I think the important thing to remember is that when you use any of these terms, you want to make sure you're defining what you mean, because not everybody is going to have the same definitions.
Yeah, Audrey, and you're exactly right. That's why I wanted to have this slide up here, because we all know it. Well, we all understand the ideas of what education online has been for the last, decade or so, where you type your question and you get the answer, and it's the asynchronous format. But as we move forward and these gajillions of technologies popped up in the last 5, 6, 10 years. These terms mean different things to different institutions and to different people. So having said that, I don't know that we here on this panel are going to have a definitive answer as to what these terms are, but we know what they mean to us. And so as we go through and we talk about hybrid learning, we'll be sure to mention what that means with our answer. So thank you so much for that, team. I appreciate it. So quick quote up here. This really goes to say that, there's thousands of faculty and students that are now familiar with online learning. We all got a crash course in that. And so it's less about the panic mode now and more about how can we use this strategically moving forward, right? We did the Band-Aid stuff, but now long-term, how are we going to move forward? So here's some fun statistics that we found. 68% of students would prefer a hybrid learning option post-pandemic. 70% of university administrators, IT departments, and other staff said they would like a remote option. So it's not going anywhere. We're kind of here to stay in one mode or another, right? So I just want to point this out where it's less reactive and more strategic at this point, which we're going to hammer away today. That's kind of the definition that we're working with. Okay, innovations of hybrid learning. Let's get to some of our discussion topics. And I see that there are some chats, some question and answers popping up. I'd love it if you all would, keep those coming, and you feel free to vote up or vote down those questions. I don't think you can vote down. I think it's mostly just vote up. But so as you see something, you're like, I want to know about that too. Go ahead and click that like button, and that will prompt us to answer it more quickly. Okay, key learnings and insights. So what kinds of hybrid learning do you all implement at your institution, and why did you decide on that hybrid strategy? Audrey, I'd love to hear from you, and then we'll kick it over to Adrian.
Perfect, thank you. So coming into the pandemic, we had started to experiment with what we said before was blended learning. So we had online asynchronous modalities, we had live online modalities such as this, and of course we had in-person on-campus programming. And we started also to combine those and to experiment with that. But to be honest, most of our learners and our clients were not asking for them to be combined, right? That was something that you would start off and want one modality or another. During the pandemic, that changed. And we started doing a lot more experimentation here. And coming out of the pandemic, we're seeing demand for all combinations and all permutations and all orders of those three different modalities. Regarding high flex, where some of the learners are on campus and some of them are remote. This is something also we did a good deal of during COVID, right? Because you would have a lot of people who had to quarantine or were uncomfortable being in a room with other people. So we offered them a remote option. Coming out of the pandemic, we aren't seeing the demand for that modality for our executive program. So I don't think that is an area of emphasized focus for us strategically, as much as it sounds like it is for Adrian.
So Adrian, over to you.
Sure. So I think this is a great question. And we do hybrid a few different ways. So one of them is we do courses that are entirely live online, except for one weekend where students come from Friday through Sunday. And about half of their contact hours for the semester are in that one weekend. We also do hybrid where we have Harvard College students. So these are Harvard College courses, typically large lecture courses where the college students are in person, and it's the extension students who are participating through a live stream or asynchronously. And I'm happy to answer questions about either of those. In general, I'm not going to focus on those two today unless anyone has questions. The third model that we do is a high flex model. So we call this Helix Classroom, which stands for Harvard Extension Live Interactive Experience. And it's something that we started doing in about 2015. We began piloting this. And it is a true high flex where we have classes on campus. The professor is always on campus. And then students have the choice of attending either in person, coming to campus, or attending live online. And we bring them into the classroom through Zoom, or participating asynchronously, watching the recording and doing other asynchronous activities. And for us, this has been really critical for our adult part-time learners, because we know that with each of these formats, there are benefits and trade-off in terms of flexibility and in terms of connection. And what we're trying to do here is really put that decision into the hands of the students rather than us making it for them. So it empowers the students to decide, can they come to Cambridge? Are they even local? Many are not. Or do they need that flexibility of asynchronous participation or something in between? And it really allows them to pick week to week.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate that. And Adrian, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't comment on your really cool studio. Can you tell us what's going on there?
Sure. So this studio, we're excited about it. It's fairly new, but this is actually one we use for those courses that are the Harvard College courses, where the extension school students don't have as much direct access to the faculty member. And the commodity that is in the shortest supply is faculty time. And so the studio is something we use to entice faculty to come in, and it's set up as a live online experience. And then they hold sessions specifically for their extension students. So the studio is how we help get them in the door. Almost always it's the experience they have with the students and the great conversations they're able to have that keeps them coming back semester after semester. But that's part of our strategy.
I love it. So it's just as much of a carrot for the instructor as it is for the students. I love that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, you know, instructor burnout's a real thing. You know, we're seeing it time and time again at different schools. So I get that you have to keep it, you know, fun, and that studio is certainly fun. So thanks for sharing. Yeah, I get the side view. It's totally, I'm just waiting for the newscaster, you know. Back to you, Edmund. Excellent. Well, we did have a question in the chat that's gotten a lot of up likes, and it's, do you define percent online versus percent in person for hybrid, or percent synchronous versus asynchronous? I think the question there is, you know, how are you defining hybrid? Is it async versus synchronous, or is it, you know, a certain amount online versus a certain amount in person? Do you all have a definition for that?
So I'm going to say for our high flex model, no, we don't. That is entirely in the hands of students, which is great for students. It does make it challenging for things like the registrar's office, trying to figure out how large of classrooms to book, because we don't always know in advance how many people are going to plan to come to campus. But it is very much in the students' hands, which of those they choose.
Thank you, Audrey.
Yeah, I would say we wouldn't define anything as a hard percentage per se. I think that I've used words like significant versus sort of cursory or tangential, right? So as long as we're thinking about one, or to be more than one of those three modalities as we're designing a program, then we will call it blended, which I think is actually really important, so that you know when to pay attention to which learnings, which experiences, which types of connections you're going to try to to have in each of those different modalities, and you can be thoughtful about how they weave together. But we haven't talked about it. In fact, percents are hard, right? Because what are you talking about? Seat time or homework time, or it's difficult to even come up with the percents, let alone draw straight line barriers between them.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that was a challenging question. Asynchronous versus synchronous, or like in person versus not. I think there's any number of ways you can define that for your institution. And so this next question, what are some of your basic expectations as an educator in a hybrid class? I think we just kind of touched on that with making it fun, right? But I'd love to hear from you both, what type of expectations you have for your hybrid teaching, and what you expect out of your faculty.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in on this one. I think I think what faculty can expect from us is a certain amount of support. So we all know that during the pandemic, everything shifted very quickly. We were already doing this model, but even within all of the online we were already doing, there was a whole lot of scrambling. And I think that's just where we have all been and where we needed to be. But I think as we come out of this pandemic, really, I think faculty should expect that they get a certain amount of support and training up front in terms of thinking through how to communicate with their students, how to adapt their activities, and some support with the technology, I think, is important for us too. And I can go into more details on this later. I think what we expect from them, from our instructors, is that they will put the time and the effort into communicating and teaching all of their groups of students.
I guess I would point out that the expectations that the faculty have are really similar to the expectations that the learners have. And coming into a hybrid program, I think everybody's expectations, or at least their hope, is that they can try to replicate a classroom experience and replicate that energy and that interaction in a virtual format. And that's important because the virtual format has, like people were saying in the chat at the beginning, it has flexibility and convenience and a lot more accessibility to people, right? So you're saying, I'm going to buy those things and then I'm going to compromise engagement and I'm going to try to try to push engagement as to the asymptote of what it would be like in a classroom. I think where we are moving as a result of the last 2 years is to actually exceed those expectations and say, actually, what can we do here that we couldn't have done, in the classroom? One of the benefits somebody mentioned in the chat at the beginning was innovation, right? So I think there are things that we can do in a virtual format. For instance, if you're talking about engagement with faculty, right? One way to do this is to have the brilliant studio like Adrian has, right? I'm a faculty member. It's really hard for me to conduct a class that I'm used to doing in person if I can't see everybody's facial expressions and tell if they're paying attention and laughing at my jokes and like that. So when our faculty have this sort of setup, they can be, they have a better experience, but they can also deliver a better experience, right? But when that's not available and when you are, during the pandemic stuck in your living room, right, you're able to be creative and you can develop a different kind of connection with the faculty. So we have one faculty who, we had this big conference that was pivoted online at the very last minute in March of 2020. And she gave us a tour of her home and her garden, right? So this was an insight into her life that established that connection in a very, very different way than a in-person experience would have been, but effective just as much, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. And there, you know what, we're getting a lot of questions about seeing that whole studio. So Adrian, thank you. Got the whole pan. That's what we're looking at here. Wow, look at that. That's the whole command center.
Thanks, guys.
It really is a news broadcast. You were there live. If there was a green screen, you could tell us about the weather.
I could, yes.
Love that.
And I will say we don't use this for full classes. When we do use the studio, it's an add-on to a class. It's usually 1 or 2 sessions a semester.
So speaking of right, like different types of classes, there is a question in the chat specifically around, best ways to use hybrid for like a science class. I know that's kind of putting you on the spot, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean, we have experimented in many ways in the last couple of years. These are much more challenging. Some of what makes this particularly challenging is for students who are pre-med. There are med schools that sometimes have requirements about whether things are done in person or online. So that should be a baseline conversation where you're starting. But some different ways we've done it. We are experimenting with classes that are happening virtually in some capacity, either live online or asynchronous, with in-person labs so that students just travel to campus to do the labs. So then they're still doing the labs in person. We have also tried some virtual lab tools, which can work in some cases. We've also tried mailing lab kits so that students get all of the components for a lab shipped to their home, which in some cases has worked very well. Customs has been an issue when you're trying to mail, say, sheep's brains around the world. It can get held up in customs and make things quite complicated. But I think there are a lot of options here and a lot of things to explore in this area.
Thank you. Audrey?
So in executive education, our science is different. We do not go anywhere near sheep brains. Right? Our labs would be a lot more like a conference room. And I would say when you're thinking about when you're trying to match modality to learning outcome, this is a complete oversimplification, but I would call out 3 different sorts of learning you might want to enact. And I would say if you're trying to learn, if you're trying to acquire knowledge, you want to learn a framework. I think that's probably better to do online. I can slow down and rewind what you're saying, right? If I didn't catch it quite well the first time, and I can take my time. That's why those kinds of that kind of teaching, even traditionally, would happen. I present the framework in class, and then I would send my students home with their homework to learn the framework. I think that another kind of learning that we do a lot of here in exec ed is trying to transform thinking, right? Having these aha moments, and there'll be a setup and maybe this is done through a case study that's dealt with Socratically in the classroom, or a simulation or something. And to get that big aha transformation, that's a lot easier to do in person in a group because of the energy that co-presence creates. And then I think finally there is practical application of what you learn. And that, again, I'm going to say is probably better to do virtually, because then I can do it instead of in a, in a simulation that's sort of contrived and fictional. I can do it in my actual job. I can practice this framework in the next meeting I'm running with my staff. So I think when you think about what kind of learning you're trying to do, you can combine these different modalities, right? Because most learning is going to have some of each of those, and deliver a really impactful program and impactful experience through that combination.
And if I can just jump on there and highlight something Audrey said, I think one of the things that can be really powerful about the online experiences is that they don't have to be done online. So to Audrey's example, you can have an activity that is then you should go and apply this in your own workplace or in your own area, your neighborhood, your city. That can be very powerful. And then the bringing it back and sharing with others can be a really great way to help students see the big picture of what they're learning, to help them understand all of these different variations, particularly in a global context if you've got international students. So I think it can be very powerful.
Thank you. Yeah, I completely agree. We're getting a lot of questions around training and support, and how do we provide that to faculty to teach in a high flex mode and to help them learn design high flex. And that kind of brings us to our last question there. Well, similarly, I suppose, who needs to be at the table to support a hybrid initiative, right? You have to have the faculty on board, but then the faculty need to have the training to be on board, right? So I suppose we can answer this in two parts. One, who needs to be at the table when you begin a hybrid initiative? And secondly, what types of training and support are you going to then offer to make sure those best practices are being used across your faculty? And whoever wants to answer it first.
I'm going to go ahead on this one, Audrey.
Okay, thanks. So I think the first question is really simple. Who needs to be at the table is anybody who is invested in the learning outcomes of what you're trying to teach. I think in our case, that would be, our faculty and staff, somebody representing the voice of the learners, our clients, typically it would be their learning and development office, but also the program sponsors, who are typically the hardest ones to try to pull in. But when we can get their involvement in the decisions we're making, that's when we're going to have the most impactful program that really meets their expectations. I think it's important when you have different modalities combined to not only have the people that deliver those different modalities at the table together, but to make sure they're like listening to each other, right? Because everybody, those groups come with their how they're used to doing things, what their expectations and priorities are, and they really need to listen to each other and be able to collaborate together. This is something that has been a big learning curve for us here over the pandemic, when our online team and our face-to-face team had operated quite distinctly, to be honest. 2 years ago, we now have to work side by side and share a lot more and communicate a lot more. But I think it's hard and it's slower. The more people at the table, right, the slower that's going to be. But I think the diversity of thought there and the having everybody's expectations laid out up front is going to be what you need to have a successful outcome of your program. The second question was about training faculty, and I would say that this is interesting. So our faculty go into a live classroom, and they don't get a lot of training, right? They just kind of go do it, and maybe they will have a mentor on the faculty here, but there's not really so much of a formal process for them to follow. And when they moved online, I think it gave faculty a little bit of permission to say, I'm not sure I know how to do this, right? It was expected that you didn't know how to create an online course, and you had an instructional designer help you think through what you were trying to achieve and what the best ways to do that might be, and what some creative and innovative ideas that you might not have thought of might be to achieve your outcomes and to increase engagement with the students. So I think a lot of our faculty have actually taken what they've learned online and taken that experience of being more intentional about their teaching process, and they're now applying it to their face-to-face programs.
Yeah, thank you. Adrian, I'd love to hear your response.
Sure. I think this is a great question. I think to Audrey's earlier point, who needs to be at the table? There's a lot of folks when you're launching programs and initiatives involving hybrid or involving high flex, making sure that you understand the student pathways that they're looking for, understand the program needs. But I think once we really get onto the ground level, for us, the thing that worked really well when we were setting this all up is we had a really close partnership between folks on the pedagogy side and folks on the tech side. And we were really working very closely to figure out how to create the classroom spaces that it would allow people to teach in the most natural ways using technology that we had available, and also that was built on top of all of the systems that we were already running. So the details really do matter. And I think still, as we have scaled, we continue to have folks who do the AV setup, who part of their job is to help faculty feel comfortable as they walk into the classroom on the first day. They're just sort of, they're there as a comforting presence. And then the first few weeks, we leave them, the faculty, little notes on the podium with tips that say things like, remember to talk to all of your groups of students. And then we ask the AV folks to help communicate that. And it's really about building those habits that are not about technology, they're about communication with the students. In terms of upfront training, we do have every faculty member come in for a practice run of their course. And they also have other folks they can work with in advance to think through how they're going to do activities and that kind of thing. But we have them come in, practice talking to the camera, and part of what probably the most important piece of training we do is to try to help them set the tone for the very first day of class. So we really encourage them to say hello to everybody as they come in. Hello to everybody who's here. Hello to everybody who's live online. Hello to everybody who's watching from home. It's amazing what a difference that small thing makes. And then make sure that they're talking through on that first day, they're calling on the students who are live online, because the tone you set on that day one is going to continue across your class. And then making sure if the asynchronous students are participating in other ways, which we help them figure out, that you're referring back to that in the next class. Oh, I noticed on the discussion board that there was this great post from an asynchronous student. Here's what it is, here's how it can lead us off. So the training is very much not about technology. It's really about communication and collaboration with students.
Yeah, I think that seems to be the key, is making sure that, the students are just as committed to their education as the faculty are. Right. And so that there's some other questions we can kind of dovetail into this, and then we'll move on to the next topic. But I think it's important that we address these things specifically. How are you managing faculty workloads in a high flex environment, right? Because it is more. And Adrian, I think you've got like 15 people helping you out right now with the cameras. You got a drone in there, I think. I don't know. But yeah, I think these types of models where you talk about workload and what's expected of faculty, I'm sure there is some pushback from some faculty, and about, is the education the same caliber? And I think that there isn't a right answer to that. I think it's up to your faculty to make sure that they're, bringing their A game, they're utilizing the tools that they have at their disposal, and also making sure that the students there are also, committed to their own education. So I know that there's a question in there and less of a ramble. And I suppose the question is, how exactly do you make sure that your faculty can handle, an online environment? And I'd love to hear from both of you. And Adrian, you can just keep it going.
Sure. So I will say, again, we started this in 2015. So I do think we're in a slightly different place where people are tired in a way that they were not tired in 2015. And that is a reality of the situation. But when we started HiveFlex, we were building off of a lecture capture system where the courses were live streamed and students had to communicate through a text-based chat. So as soon as we put Zoom into that classroom, let people communicate fully with their students, this was the easiest rollout we have ever done. We had one classroom that could do it in one time slot initially, and we had people begging to be in that time slot. And as fast as we could do classrooms, we had people filling those slots. So I think that for many faculty, we had people saying, this is what I have been waiting for some cases 20 years. And really wanting that level of interaction. Now, the asynchronous component is harder. And that's where we try to really work with them to figure out what is the simplest plan we can come up with to help you have a routine around that asynchronous component.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I'd love to hear from you, Audrey.
Sure. So, as I said, we did HyFlex during the pandemic, and as you're noting, there's a lot of resources involved in doing that well, and we're not seeing probably the demand for that coming out of the pandemic. So this may shift. I have a similar story regarding asynchronous content. So we had, in 2015, similar timeframe, we launched our first real online blended program, online blended meaning virtual, so asynchronous as well as synchronous online components. And many, it was hard to get faculty to participate in that program, right? This is all optional for them. And so the more brave, intrepid faculty signed on, and the other ones who were a little more scared or apprehensive or unfamiliar or skeptical did not. During the pandemic, both the faculty missed, right, being able to share their frameworks with the executives. And they got more used to technology, a little less skeptical and a little less uncomfortable with it. And so same thing, we've seen faculty over the last 2 years really start knocking on the door. How can I do all of this, right? And what they're discovering, as I said a minute ago, right, is that they can be really intentional and thoughtful. We let them tell us, like, we're not going to put this video out into the world until you have approved it. We'll walk you through your script. We'll do as many takes as you need to take to get that video to be something you're comfortable with. And for some of our faculty, that's a lot, right? They're very, very particular. But I think that they actually, they can spend all that time doing it, and then they develop that comfort and they find the things that are easier about it. I think Adrian was saying the hard part was async. For us, I think the hardest part is the live online. And I think it was until we got, our studio isn't quite as nice as hers, but until we got that big studio where there was the big windows and they could feel the interaction of the participants, and actually feel like that was happening in a meaningful way that was comparable to the classroom. I think that was, you could see the grins on their faces. You could see their eyes light up when that studio opened. So it's a really big deal, right? They were severely handicapped when they were stuck on a tiny little screen.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate that. Studio is cool. I know I was making fun, but it looks really cool. I'm super jealous I didn't have that when I was going through my online courses. So I appreciate that. So let's shift gears here. I think we've got a poll that we're going to launch next. So how are you currently assessing hybrid student engagement? And now this one is an actual poll, I believe, and rather than a type your own answer. So I'm going to leave some time there for that to populate. Okay, so you should have that little pop up for you. Oh, I tried to vote. I can't vote. Hosts and panelists can't vote. All right, we'll give you a couple more seconds here. 10 seconds on the clock. Good luck. Okay, let's see those results. I don't know if you can see those results. I think they're being shared by the host. So looks like a combination seems to be the resounding winner here, whether it's attendance, live participation, exams, assignments, asynchronous participation, and then some kind of a combo seems to be the best method here. So this next section of questioning is really more around our students and ways we can build communication with them, and how we can do a good job serving them with the technology that we have available. So let's, we actually have a question in the chat, which I think kind of dovetails into this portion here. And it says, how do you manage the student experience to ensure the remote students and the in-person students receive a comparable experience in high flex models? So Audrey, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to hear from you. Kick us off. How do you manage the experience of both types of learners to give them the same comparable outcomes and experience?
So I'm going to give a real quick answer to this because we don't do a ton of high flex at the business school here. We did a little bit of it winter quarter when people were on campus, but a lot of people had to not be here. But I think they've done a lot more thinking about how to, because this is a much more strategic objective for Harvard Continuing Studies. I think I think all of this boils down to you have to be really thoughtful and intentional, right? When we're so used to doing stuff in class and everybody gets it and nobody has to think about how to have an in-person, lecture class run. I think the point of, I think the idea of starting at the very beginning is probably the biggest one, right? So Adrian already said this, make sure that everybody is saying hello, make sure that everybody interacts. Everybody comes off mute and says something at the very beginning. So you've kind of broken that ice a little bit, right? Maybe do something at the very beginning with a breakout room or something else where the in-class people or in-presence people need to participate with remote people, and let all of those connections happen at the very beginning so that people aren't scared of them, right? But I'm sure she's got much more sophisticated things to say about this.
I really don't. That really is the key, I think, is getting everyone interacting and thinking intentionally about what you're doing. And being intentional even about the pieces of learning that don't seem like they're a big deal. So things like those 5 minutes before class when people are chatting with each other, that time matters. That's a time for students to build connections, for students to build networks. For live online students, the chat works very, very well in that way. And for asynchronous students, things like video annotation can give them more of an informal way to communicate with each other. But things that we recommend are things like doing icebreakers up front. So when I taught a high flex course, we did the icebreaker in class with the live online students. We're part of going around the room. And I asked the asynchronous students to film a quick little answer to the icebreaker that we then played in class the next week. So we want to make sure that everybody's there. But especially for the live online, which I think this question was specific for, you can go very far with breakout rooms in class activities and just being very intentional about how you're building and fostering that course community. I think the other thing actually is to make sure that everybody can see and hear what they need to be able to see and hear. So the sort of baseline tech that you need to make sure that the students online can hear the students in the classroom, even more than see, can hear the students in the classroom and vice versa. Because if you can't hear everybody, then you have all of these gaps in what's happening in the classroom. And same thing, if you're going to have faculty doing board work or students doing board work, there has to be a way for people to see what's being written on the board, which is not always so easy.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a loaded question, and I think it's a hard one, and it's one that we've all been struggling with. I think, making sure that everybody has the same type of experience. And so this leads us to this first question here. What ways can faculty build relationships and maintain communication with hybrid students? And there was a question that in the chat about what is being done to promote socialization and connection outside the classroom, but still using those tools. So twofold there, right? What are we doing, inside the class to build that feeling of a community and communication, and then outside of class using these tools? So I'll leave it up to you, whoever would like to respond first. Looks like Adrian, you're up.
Sure. I mean, I think I've answered this in other ways, but I think that a lot of what we encourage the faculty to do is spend that class time talking to students. We also do encourage online office hours. So everybody comes to office hours over Zoom. It's not that there's separate in-person office hours from online office hours, and that there is regular communication happening with students through the LMS and other platforms. I think that's the biggest way that we encourage that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I think this is, again, it's about being intentional, right? You assume that this happens when you're in the classroom. Nobody's really given it a lot of explicit thought. So when we moved live online, we had to change the structure of the time that the lecture would be given, right? So instead of it being in the classroom, it's a lot easier to have a back and forth Q&A. So when we went live online, we said, actually, what we're going to do is we're going to extend the time and put more Q&A at the end and have some informal chat time at the end, sort of officially stated. We've also done the Zoom office hours. I think that's been very successful and appreciated. And even in a program that would not have normally had office hours, normally you would have found that faculty, during lunch or something, right? So instead you have that opportunity. And then for asynchronous things, I think the faculty, you don't talk about everybody the same way, but in general, they don't know what the right norms are. So I think what we've had to do and what we've again found successful is our faculty are not going to be sitting there in the message board waiting for something to answer, but we'll have staff and other course support looking for, this is actually a really interesting discussion that's getting a lot of back and forth, a lot of energy. Do you, Professor XYZ, want to comment on this? And then here's the link to go log in, to make it really easy for them to know when and how to participate asynchronously.
Yeah,
I think that's a great point. If I could just build on that a little bit, the relationship with teaching assistants can be very, very useful here. So for example, one thing we do in larger courses is we have one teaching assistant for about every 18 students. And if it is a larger course, those TAs will teach section meetings every week, which may be, digging into a reading more deeply. It may be homework help. It can be all sorts of different things, but they schedule them at a variety of different times so that students who have either are across the world and have time zone challenges, or, just maybe they live here in Cambridge, but they have work schedules, caretaking schedules, they can find a time that works for them. Yeah. So that's another approach that we take.
And I really want to draw that, just the setting up of this class is totally transferable to the real world, right? Our company class is completely remote. I met the entire company about a month ago at our company kickoff. It was the first time I had met people that I worked with for 2 years. And so scheduling just to chats on Zoom, right? Not about anything. So it's not transactional amongst your colleagues. You're setting your students up now for what the work environment is quickly changing, at least here in the States, what it looks like. So I think it is important that these kinds of things are mentioned. Yeah, we've got students that are all over the globe in this, so we have to have 2 times, and please utilize chat. And I think that is so super important, because it's not just for learning, it's for the way they're going to work, as we progress. So thank you for that. Thank you both for your answers there. Let's talk about data. So what data do you think is important in measuring student engagement in hybrid courses? And there was a question in the chat, which was, how do you report those students attending a HyFlex course? Are they attending online, or are they attending in person? So I'd love to hear, Adrian, I see you nodding your head, so why don't you kick us off?
I will say it's very hard. This is something that we are honestly tracking. Attendance is very challenging, and we have some different attendance tools, but it's about bringing the data together is something that we're still working on. So you can track who's attending live online. You can track who's watching a recording. We're experimenting with ways to track in-person attendance, but actually that in and of itself is a challenge. So, no.
Thank you. Yeah, Audrey?
I think this is a really dangerous line of thinking. I think that, so coming from thinking back in the history of online courses, right? Engagement was always this elusive thing that you obviously have in person, and it's really hard to do online, and especially online asynchronously. So all of the things that you put in that poll were ways that people tried to measure engagement. And when they found that that engagement was sort of not where they wanted it to be, they thought, well, how am I going to do this? And they made things, mandatory, or you got points towards your grade or something like this for posting on the message boards or for showing up for different things. And I think those are all valid ways to measure engagement. But if you think about, I'm measuring this so that I can optimize it, what you end up having is, you have required message board posts. No one gets value out of that, right? And what you end up doing, what I think the engagement, like secret sauce that you're really after, is intrinsic motivation from the learners to learn. And when you require them to do things that feel like checks in the boxes and busy work, you actually erode the intrinsic motivation, right? With those external motivating factors of requirements and grades and things. So what we have found is actually the best way to drive higher student engagement doesn't have anything to do with the measurement. It has to do with feedback and asking people, how is this going for you, right? With executive learners, you can pretty well assume they're here to learn. They want to gain these skills. You're not forcing them. It's not like, middle school. So if they want to learn and you ask them, are you learning? Are you having the experience that you want to have? And they say no, they're going to tell you more about that, and they're going to help you help them, right? So when you listen and then you adapt what you're doing to meet their needs and to solve their problems, then they feel heard, and that will drive those engagement levels. But I think trying to directly influence, attendance and especially for executive learners, trying to directly influence those things is a losing strategy.
I couldn't agree more with that. I think that, it's when you're trying to collect very specific data, often what you end up measuring is the things you can collect data on, which is very different than, is the student having a transformative learning experiences, which is what our actual goal is. And so figuring out, how do you make sure the class is meaningful to these students? That's the question. And one strategy we use for this is we encourage faculty to build weekly feedback surveys into the course, which are just little check-ins. So we've sort of adapted Brookfield's CIQs, for those of you who know what that is. But we just ask a question like, what was most useful or engaging to you this week? What was most challenging or distancing for you this week? And what else do you want to tell me? And they're anonymous. But we get so much information in that of, this activity was particularly meaningful to me, this other one was not. And often what we see is that the class is pretty split down the middle, because something that is meaningful to one group of students is the thing that other people think, well, I really wish I didn't have to do that. And so then bringing that back to students, having that conversation and saying, we do a variety of things in this class because different people learn in different ways and different people find different things meaningful to them. So having that window, I think, has been great. And this is one where hybrid is actually can work better than in person, because in person, there's this kind of fiction that we all have as teachers, that you can look students in the eye and tell whether they're engaged, which maybe, right? But if they're disengaged, are they disengaged because the content is not meaningful to them? Are they disengaged because they just had a horrible day at work? Are they disengaged because they're hungry? It doesn't tell you all of the things that might be happening in students' lives. But if you ask, you get really wonderful. Wonderful.
And this comes into the responsibility of the student to be, engaged as well. And we all have off day or days. So I get that for sure. One of the reasons class was founded was to add engagement features. So you can track like participation, average talking amongst their peers in the class, and googly eyes if they're looking at something else. And, and it's less about caught you not paying attention, more about, I need to bring them back in. So let's go into breakout rooms, everyone, because I'm clearly being boring, or, this is not connecting for you all. So I love that we took that that question about how to report and more about like, is this what we should be doing? So thank you, Audrey, for kicking us off on that path. I appreciate that. Okay, so let's talk about this, the last question here. So what creative things have you incorporated to assist engaging in engaging with your students in a hybrid class? So Adrian, I mean, you're right now you've got it going on. So do you want to lead us off? I mean, that's pretty engaging.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we really try to do is think about not what tools are we using, but how can we use them really well to help foster connection. So for example, right now, one of the things you might notice is that I'm actually looking at you when I'm talking. So if we can get a wide camera shot here, I'm able to do that because Zoom is set up on a teleprompter right now rather than a monitor. So I can look at you and I am talking to you as a way of being able to foster that sense of connection. And in a classroom, you don't need a teleprompter because you're further away. But how do you set up the cameras in relationship to the monitor? So very often in hybrid spaces, you see cameras kind of mounted in a corner with the expectation that it will observe. We're not trying to have the online students observe, we're trying to have them connect. So if you align that camera with the monitor, then you can talk to the actual students while looking at them, which makes a huge difference. And in our larger classrooms, we'll put 2 monitors. So we have one in the front, one in the back, so that the students in the class can talk to the students online. And if we reconfigure into small groups, then we are able to talk no matter what perspective people are sitting at.
Thank you. Audrey?
I would agree strongly with Adrian that it's less about the technology and more about paying attention to and being thoughtful about your learners and what's gonna keep them engaged. I think that you talked about maybe we're going to start noticing engagement dropping when I can see everybody's faces and they're kind of off on the side looking at their phone, and then I'll put everybody in a breakout room. And what we've tried to use as a best practice is to actually preemptively do that. Like we know, 5 minutes, 7 minutes, people are going to start getting bored, switch it up. You've done that here, right? Now we're going to have a chat. Now we're going to have a poll. So, keeping people on their toes, keeping things kind of moving like that is very important to do intentionally in any of the virtual formats. I think also you want to avoid having a formula, if I'm always going chat and then lecture and then poll and then breakout rooms, maybe I need to switch the ordering around for one of my upcoming lessons. I think that's one thing. Another thing I would say is thinking about when you're doing activities that are meant to be interactive and engaging, whether that's an icebreaker or a social activity even, utilizing things, so that the instinct is I'm going to do 2 truths and a lie online, right? But there are some things that you can do online that are harder to do in person, right? So here's a really obvious one that we've done, but also like my son's guitar class did it, is using a Kahoot, right? You can do that online. But then we've also had, you can have everybody come to the Zoom and think about what their virtual background is going to be. Bring the fruit that best represents you and tell us why, right? I think trying to use the technology instead of just trying to copy what's in the classroom is where we've had, I think, the most fun and the best success in driving engagements in the virtual formats.
I love that. And just like that, an hour went by. We did it. The webinar. I think the questions in the chat and the questions in the Q&A were fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for your participation, no matter where you were in the world. I want to thank our panelists, Adrian and Audrey. Thank you so much. Thank you to your institutions for allowing you and to be part of this. Adrian, thank you for the whole support team that you've got there in that fantastic studio. Thank you, Inside Higher Ed. And thank you to the support team here at Class, Vanessa and Sidra, for this phenomenal webinar. The recording will be going out to everybody. Expect that in the next day or so. And again, thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a great rest of your class, great rest of your semester, and stay safe, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.